Treasury. I think that's really big. $1 billion acquisition for G Treasury, corporate Treasury bonds. And I'm hearing it's like 15, 20,000 different corporate bonds that will be able to be moving around in the Ripple ecosphere and final bridge asset transfer with XRP. Evernorth is really clever. Another $1 billion. And I believe, and this is a bit my interpretation, but based on what I'm reading, it's a venture cap internal firm. It's a venture cap subsidiary and tech services and partnership funding. Then there's Trident, $500 million, Treasury Reserve Management for corporations. Then you got a bunch of little ones, and I honestly hadn't heard of any except SBI Holdings out of Japan. They're like a liaison for the entire nation of Japan. And I don't know how many people are aware, I know you probably are, but it was November last year that the banking authorities in Japan ordered XRP compliance to every single Japanese financial firm for this year. Last November, they ordered that. I heard a rumor, and I can't substantiate it, but the Bank of Japan ordered no more usage of SWIFT. Yes. I tend not to believe that, but maybe it's true. They want to use XRP because they're savings.
Yes.
SWIFT
I see that.
SWIFT is going to be relegated to a secretary that handles all the data and memos. I had a broker once, and he used to say, "Runner."
Well, can I add something to? I want to compliment what you're saying because you have been doing a lot of research into this. I'm excited to hear your insights. But one of the other pieces that a lot of people haven't connected yet, this is something Jake Claver has openly talked about, is the reverse carry trade. And, for just some context, Japan has publicly been working with Ripple for many years. Japanese banks already have publicly committed to using XRP by 2025. Here we are. I think it's happening gradually and effectively. But they have been preparing for this very scenario because systemic stress is hitting global liquidity markets, and that's tying us back into the dollar. But as more money is going to flow back into Japan and the credit markets are going to come under more pressure, this is when you're going to have this necessity, this need for some sort of neutral instant settlement system that's outside of the dollar or even the yen. That becomes unavoidable. And that's exactly how XRP can play a critical role in Japanese banking infrastructure as a bridge asset for on-demand liquidity. So it's very interesting to see how all of this is really accelerating, to your point.
Let me make a third point. Okay, I came with my notes. These are major points in my opinion. I can get to the Japanese yen carry trade in a bit because that's huge, and I've been talking about that for 5 years. Okay, let me go back a little walk back in the 1980s when I'm not sure. I don't think you were alive. No. Okay, I finished my doctorate in 1980, and I got a job at Digital Equipment Corporation. Mm-hmm. And 4 years later, I left the quality control area of that business. And we were number 2 at the time. I'm a Decky. I will be a Decky for as long as I live. Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, DEC. It was IBM number 1, DEC number 2, Hewlett Packard number 3. When I got to the marketing research job, I changed jobs because I had a really, really crappy manager in my quality control work. That was 4 years. It wasn't wasted, but it was interfered with and not properly rewarded. So I took a raise. I took a promotion, and I went into a marketing research group. The first thing they had me do was work on a marketing research survey, big survey, 50,000 in the United States and Europe and England. And what was the focus? Unix. Now, you probably know what Unix is. You've probably heard of C and C++ and C++. Well,
no.
Okay. There are programming languages in Unix.
Okay.
C+, and now you got a raft of other programming languages like Python is very popular, and there are a few others that I'm not very familiar with because I predate the Unix. I was in graduate school in the 1970s. Unix came about around 1982, 3, 4. It was from AT&T. All right, why do I bring this up? Because Unix enabled interoperability. Does that zip word mean something to you now? With
Yes.
XRP, interoperable, different banking systems, different structures.
Basically one settlement language.
One settlement language and one originating language. Two different incompatible languages. That's why they call XRP the bridge asset. Well, why was Unix big at the time? What was really important back then was that IBM had its hardware, and then IBM had its software built upon its operating system. All proprietary, all private. Digital, we had VAX VMS, virtual management system. It was for swapping. Now we know what swapping is again. Swapping has new meaning in the banking industry. Back then, they had swapping for memory efficiency, and you could get along with less RAM because digital and its virtual management system was extraordinarily efficient and a global leader. Okay, so if you had a bunch of software and you had 10 years invested in it at IBM, and then suddenly you're working with a new hardware system like Hewlett-Packard or Honeywell or Burroughs or Digital DEC. Can you move that software over? No, you could not. No, you could not. It was not interoperable. Unix was interoperable. They used to say hardware independent. And we thought, holy shit, we're going to lose our software business. And we did. And we did.
So the competition pretty much killed you with the tech.
They killed us with the tech to make the interoperable. Now,
Right.
what we've got now is that XRP is interoperable. You can have one banking system like from JP Morgan, and they communicate with a Rome bank, or communicate with a Brussels bank, or a what's the Frankfurt, Germany bank, and it's interoperable. So it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Dollars to Deutschmark, no, not Deutschmark, to euros. Dollars to yen in Japan. Okay, we've got a huge advantage with XRP being a leader in the interoperability. And you know, after I heard interoperable about 20 times, I thought, sounds like Unix in the 1980s. I'm telling you, Unix was a revolution in the computer industry, and XRP is going to bring about a revolution in the banking industry from its interoperability.
Yes.
Oh.
And that, you know, to your point also, that's what's so interesting about these discussions. Like, a lot of people think we are indeed heading towards like some sort of digital chaos, but what we're actually watching is a controlled consolidation. And through these features, like interoperability is an example, but ultimately this does leave XRP with only one option. It basically means it's becoming that settlement layer that will underpin not only fiat, but digital currencies, stable coins, etc., tokenized commodities, bonds, and even carbon credits now. And when people start to ask, you know, the question about market cap, and I dismiss market cap really. I don't think it's not something that, it's a really stupid one. Yes. Or even price range, you know, you have to understand, like, what are we truly looking at to handle the magnitude of all of this, right? And that's when we start having those discussions about a very high XRP price.
Let me quote Jake Claver. He said, I'm tired of all these market cap limitation arguments. What exactly is the market cap for email?
Yeah, it's silly.
What a great question.
Well,
what if you had to buy some tokens in order to use your email? What's the email token going to be worth? What was it worth in 1980? What would it be worth 10 years later? Another 10 years later, another 10 years later. would it not be worth hundreds of trillions of dollars? Yes.
Yeah, but in XRP, it's a bit different. And I totally agree with that and the sentiment behind it. But when a lot of listeners, they start to look at XRP, first of all, they treat it as a token. They don't realize it's been mixed in with a lot of the nonsense out there. But in XRP, liquidity is not necessarily about how many tokens actually exist in the circulating supply. It's about how much value can actually move through the system overall in each XRP itself. And that kind of ties us into the discussion we'll get into here in a moment. But the higher the price is of XRP, the more greater its liquidity efficiency is. And exactly. That means fewer and fewer tokens are going to be required to settle larger and larger transactions. And I did write an interesting article about this on X. It's getting a lot of coverage, and I really appreciate that from the rest of the community. But I gave an example in there that if you're trying to settle, for instance, worth $1 billion of a cross-border settlement, and if you had at $1 per XRP, that transaction would require 1 billion XRP. But if you had a $10,000 XRP, just to give an example, per XRP, that means it would require just 100,000 XRP. So you're significantly having fewer and fewer tokens moving across that network because there's less slippage, there's lower volatility, there's friction. Faster finality. Exactly.
Less friction.
Very exciting.
And that's why
I'm very optimistic about this.
That's why the big players with their big usage and their big volume and their big savings are going to want a big price.
Exactly.
It's not very difficult to follow that logic. I've actually had some good arguments with people who are what I consider to be uninformed. I don't want to call them ignorant.
Not your brother again, right?
No, I haven't talked to my brother in 5 years.
Okay.
5 years. I know that's hard to believe, but no. I have no interest in further communication with my brother.
I'm sorry, but yeah, that kind of goes back to the pandemic. It really destroyed lives and affected families.
Well, if you're going to advocate Marxism in the United States and be an opponent to liberty and the republic, there's the door.
Yeah, I know people like that.
I have no interest in a conversation with them.
Yeah. Sorry. Mm-hmm.
I don't know where you want to go next.
No, actually, I mean, if you don't mind, I mean, we can always remember we can bounce back and forth, and it's for us to bounce back and forth because there are so many other pieces in this that are all tied together. I do want to talk about what has transpired since we last spoke, and I'm sorry to the audience that it took a while to do part 2, but since we spoke, gold has made a significant move, and not just in price, but in purpose, and that's what's so important for people to not miss out on. It's not just a passive store of value anymore. It's gradually being reintegrated back into the monetary architecture as collateral. And when we start to dig even deeper into this, and I want to get your take on this, Jim, I'll ask you here in a second, behind this transformation, how gold is actually being remonetized at the institutional level, and of course, how XRP is being positioned as the settlement mechanism above that overlays it all. So I know you have been analyzing this for a while in depth since we last spoke. And, I want to ask, what are you seeing really in terms of gold's role? How has it changed in the last 6 months? And of course, how is it tying into what banks are doing globally and even XRP?
I think the big shift in the mindset regarding gold is that it's no longer thought of as a barbaric metal. It's no longer thought of as in terms of what income it can produce. And I got to say, Warren Buffett, you're a big fat liar. He got called away. He got called away after selling.
Mark Cuban too. Mark Cuban. I just want to put that out there.
Oh, okay, good. They got called away after writing covered calls, and they lost their silver. Well, Warren Buffett, I don't know the full story about Mark Cuban. He's a bit of a detestable figure.
He's a liar.
What I believe has happened is that there is it's hard to call it a transformation. It's a complete shift of mindset and perception. We now are recognized as having entered a tremendous unresolvable problem of having a debt foundation. We have a debt foundation and we got a gigantic debt. And we've been told that debt is a good, solid foundation, but now the big, fat $38 trillion debt is causing the entire global financial system to stutter, to fail. For instance, big banks in the United States are not lending institutions anymore. They've lost, I think, 3/4 of that function. Unless and until, for instance, the Wall Street banks and the big bank giants in the United States realize an enormous gain with XRP, they might no longer be insolvent, then they can go back to becoming a lending institution again, instead of a predatory institution that captures commercial property because they won't roll over the mortgages. Hand over your keys. I know one case, Northern Midwest, my client's friend lost $20 million because they couldn't find a rollover of their mortgage on a big property complex. Okay, so the realization, Versan, is that gold is a really effective foundation. Foundation. We need to rebuild the foundation. We got a lot of gold out there, and some nitwits, knuckleheads think, well, gold should go way down to $100 per ounce because there's so much of them.
Yeah,
so much
silly.
gold. And I tell them, this is my response, and I'm sassy. I'm always sassy. There are a lot of television sets in US and Canada. There are a lot of shoes. Why doesn't the price of TV sets go down to $20? There's a lot of supply. The reason is they're not for sale. There's a lot of gold. It's not for sale. It's set up, and it is now promised to be the foundation. And I'm just waiting for more and more digital assets to become gold related, linked to gold in some fashion. But I don't want to go down that road. I want to focus on how there's a widespread global recognition that the king dollar has destroyed the global foundation for finance.
Very powerful statement. Very true.
And XRP is very likely the top candidate to replace the treasury bill for global trade payments.
I agree.
Let's leave out the Forex reserves, because that's the other side of, it's trade payment standard and global reserves standard. But that's pretty much up in the air and a lot of dispute. And, it's integrated with stable coins. And I think, I just think it's just a time bomb before Tether has a volcano that resembles diarrhea.
I love your analogies.
I like my metaphors. I work on my metaphors in my quiet time. Let me also say, here's another one. SWIFT is the standard bearer of banking obsolescence.
Interesting. Haven't heard that one before.
7% errors. I just had an error last week, a SWIFT error. Cost me 3 days. SWIFT error, 7% SWIFT errors. Okay, those SWIFT morons, you got to get with the 20th century here. I'm sorry, 21st century, and get in gear. And I'm afraid I would really like to hear that SWIFT is relegated to memos. Okay, hey, runner. I love that. A commodity broker would say runner, and every time he did, I would laugh because I met him for lunch in Chicago. It was a very interesting meeting. Commodity traders, mostly bonds, currencies, and not a lot of other things. S&P futures, stock futures, but not cotton, not copper contracts. No, there was, what is it? The euro dollar contracts. We had lunch and I learned a bunch of different things. Runner. I want SWIFT to become the runner, and the runner for managing the Ripple XRP transfers. Okay, we're ready. We're ready, Ripple. We're ready. We got A and B all set here. No nostro vostro. I did my job with the memo because that's all I do now at SWIFT. Oh my gosh. Swift, if they're not careful, if they pick the wrong fights, they're going to be shown the door.
I think it's already happening little by little, but
I,
a few things to tackle on what you said over there, and going back to gold too, because one thing we can look at, there are so many moving pieces to all of this, but one thing we can certainly look at is the US debt. They say it's 37 trillion. I put a tweet out today. I don't agree it is 37. In fact, I think it's way over 150 trillion, because you have to factor
at
in
100. At 100.
yeah, maybe even two, right? But you have to factor in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, government expenses, the black budget, and that is something bigger. And I think over time, when with all this other frameworks being put in motion from the central banks and so forth, and all the gold buying, there's certainly another quiet story happening behind the scenes. And my point, though, is that it's going to get to a point where eventually blockchain, when we're talking about Ripple Net, it's going to expose and provide that transparency that's going to show the full picture. And I think that's a kind of moment where you could start to see gold really be at these very high valuations, like being reset, revalued, if you will, like $10,000, $20,000 an ounce. It's not fantasy, it's just math. We've spoken to people in the past who have been in the financial sector, in the gold space, specifically in Switzerland. They came up with the numbers in 2022 that gold should have been 87,000 an ounce when you factor in everything. And
Factor
where
in
am I bringing
the money supply? Factor in the
yeah,
money supply.
that's one piece of it. Certainly, I agree with you. But in essence, what I think is playing out is that gold, again, being integrated back into the system. For those, listen, the analysis is not theoretical of some of the things we've talked about here. And you and I talked about this before, maybe 2 years ago. But the mechanisms are clearly being laid out through institutional adoption, institutional behavior, central bank positions, liquidity being focused around regulatory frameworks. What regulatory frameworks? We're talking about